Good morning, everyone. Those of you who are joining us live, and those of you who may be watching this as a recording. This is the October 2024 edition of Law Chat, an early start for us here in New Zealand and a late start for my guest today, Jonathan Watmough, who joins me from Sussex in the United Kingdom. As always, Law Chat brought to you with the support of Moore Markham's accountants and business advisors specialising in financial services for the legal profession. And I'm delighted that Jonathan Watmough has joined us today. Jonathan has recently published a book which appears over my shoulder here, How to Thrive in a Commercial Law Firm. Jonathan's not just an author, he's also a former award-winning managing partner of Reynolds Porter Chamberlain over in the UK. For 5 consecutive years, his firm recorded double-digit growth, compared with many firms that didn't on the back of the GFC. He's won numerous awards during his tenure as managing partner up until 2016 when he stepped back from private practice, and since then he's been helping law firms and lawyers focus on what really matters in private practice, and that is leadership. Jonathan, thank you for joining us this morning, this evening.
Thank you for having me.
It's a great pleasure. So tell us a little bit about your background, because you evolved from being a team leader to effectively leading a very large city practice. How did that come about?
Yeah, it was more by accident than design. If you'd have told me, when I was at university that I was going to end up being a managing partner, I'd have told you were completely mad. I sort of describe it actually, Simon, as I was in the wrong place at the wrong time, really. As I think a lot of people end up, that just a gap opens up and someone says, well, you should go for this. And that's broadly speaking what happened. I had a very strong bias towards, I wasn't a natural lawyer, if you see what I mean. I didn't particularly get off on the law. I loved being with clients, and I loved being I loved understanding clients' businesses. So when the opportunity came to get more involved in the business, I suppose I just saw it as my opportunity to do something more interesting.
And when you stopped being managing partner, did you go back into private practice, or you completely stepped away from the firm?
No, yeah, I did something completely mad, really. I became managing partner at 38, and I did 10 years. And in reality, if you give up your practice, then there's no going back to it 10 years later.
Yeah.
So I'd handed over all my relationships. Plus, I wasn't match fit or up to date anymore. And I'd got out of doing transactional work because I wanted to do something different. So I was never going to go back to it. So to be honest, it was becoming a managing partner was a bit of it was always going to be the end of my legal career in that sense. And yeah. I was happy with that.
So. Yeah. So you spend your time now working with a lot of the presumably the top 100 law firms in the UK?
Yeah, it's all sorts, to be honest. Yeah, the interesting part of the UK market is there's a lot of firms between sort of 20 and 100 million pounds of turnover. A lot, like 50 to 60. And it's a really, really interesting space. So I suppose my sweet spot now is those sort of smaller end of medium-sized firms in the UK. I did quite a lot of partner coaching for the bigger firms, but to be honest, there's not a lot that you can tell a big firm about strategy or performance.
Yeah,
actually, they're getting along quite nicely. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, I was drawn to your book, which I came across just a couple of months ago, because the subtext to your book is why people, relationships, and leadership are what matters in a changing law firm world. So, do you want to explore that? Why do they matter in a changing world?
Well, yeah. The reality is they've always mattered. They've always been what matters most. So nothing's really changed. But I would say, the reason I put that as a subtitle was because in a changing world, as in a changing AI-driven world, they're going to matter even more, because as AI starts effectively providing the legal product, if you like, the personal service that sits over and above the legal product, which I will confidently predict will never ever be replaced by AI. That will be what starts mattering a lot more. And yeah, law and the knowledge of law and the application even of facts to law will become effectively table stakes, I think. But yeah, I mean, I come from an environment and a background where client service and people skills were regarded as the be all and end all, really. The basic technical ability was taken as read. And once you got beyond that, really the difference was how good are you at people and leadership? And that just applied internally, externally, and in leadership terms. So yeah, I think it's everything, really. It's hard. I think it's hard to overestimate the difference it makes in law, because there are so many good lawyers around, but the number who are really good at people and are really good at relationships and are really good at leadership they're very thin on the ground. And therefore, if you've got that, it makes a massive difference.
You say if you've got that, how did they acquire those skills in your experience? Because there will be some people who say there are some naturally born leaders. There are others that learn and acquire the skills over time. And we all know that law school doesn't necessarily teach this stuff, nor in fact do sometimes law firms themselves. So do you have
Yeah.
views on how firms can actually bring this more to the fore and invest more in leadership development?
Yeah, I mean, I do a fair amount in the L&D space, and I have a theory that there has to be a certain amount of innate emotional intelligence, for want of a better phrase, but actually, moreover, I think ability is, you still have to want to actually use those skills, and you have to want to develop those skills. I think the single biggest thing in my experience, and the single biggest thing of the way I saw my career develop, was it wasn't being in a formal L&D environment. It was simply, I had 2 or 3 really fantastic role models who gave me a lot of tough love, if you like. So it was much more on the mentoring end than the training end. I mean, 25 years ago, there wasn't a lot of training going on. You either picked it up and learned at the knee, or you sank.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I mean, that's my personal experience, but I think nowadays there is a certain type of lawyer who is very receptive to this stuff, and there's a much I think there's a much wider understanding now that just being a good lawyer is not going to cut it. It's not going to get you very far, and it might not even now. It probably won't now even get you into a salaried partnership in most firms now.
Yeah.
So I think there's a dawning realization that it's really important, and so people sit up and listen. But I suppose I was asked the other day a question at an L&D conference about which levels do partners really pay attention to this stuff. And my point was, when they're very young new partners, they are absolutely all ears. And when they're moving into leadership positions, or when they've got the motivation to move into leadership, they're all ears. There's a long, big, wide period in the middle where you can't tell them a lot.
Yeah.
That's the challenge, is getting them to raise their head from their work and their clients, dare I say it.
I mean, one of the things that's really interested me about what you documented in your book is the transition from the early days of becoming a lawyer, then going into that void where maybe you can't tell them anything because perhaps they're too busy meeting their budgets or whatever, to the stage where, beyond building business, they get to the stage where they're building a business, as I put it, or as you put it, I think. So, and becoming a team leader. And I think you, in the book, you also included what you refer to as the 32 rules for effective career transition, which I thought were really powerful. And they're a very succinct documentation, I think, of the various stages that lawyers go through before they reach that mature stage or experience. How have those 32 rules been received over in the UK?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I mean, the book has been really well received generally as being, I mean, a lot of managing partners have said, you have nailed the way that a career works in big law, if you like. And I would sort of say, well, no kidding, Sherlock. I mean, all I've done is describe the way it really works. I don't think there's any massive insight into what I've said. I just don't think it's really been written down before. I think there's been a lot of academic comments on it, but actually coming from within the profession of, look, it's actually really tough.
Yes.
It's really difficult. And so that sort of practitioner's view of, look, we get a bad press. And there are a lot of L&D people will say that lawyers are hard work and are difficult people. And I would say, well, actually, it's a really hard job and we should go a bit easier on ourselves. But understanding the sort of the gears you have to go through, I mean, even understanding that those gears exist and that there are barriers and you're not going to get past this next stage unless you tick these boxes. I think for a lot of people nowadays, especially in big law, if you don't have those role models, if you don't have a clear career framework ahead of you, you're going to have to take control yourself. and so having a clear framework and a clear understanding of, look, these are the gears you're going to have to go through. I just thought, I mean, primary reason was for me writing the book down, apart from obviously it's a bit of basic professional services marketing, but apart from that, I was thinking, well, actually, it'd be really useful for younger lawyers in particular to know this is how the system really works. And unless you understand how the system works and the game, if you like, then you can't play it.
Yeah.
So, and that's why I actually called them rules, actually.
Yes.
I was originally going to call them laws.
Yeah.
But I thought, well, lawyers might prefer rules.
Yeah. Well, with your permission, I think, I reproduced those 32 rules a few weeks ago and gave them to a group of senior associates in a long scroll and said, put this on your wall in your office and keep referring to it. And I think a very timely reminder for all people at whatever stage of their career to keep looking at that and remind themselves of the important things. We were talking beforehand, before we came on live to do this chat today, about some of the challenges facing law firms, and it sort of led to a discussion about how we see law firms evolving, whether they might be around in the way that they are in 10, 15, 20 years time, and what impact artificial intelligence may have. You've touched on that briefly. Are you optimistic about the future? Do you think law firms will still be around the way they are in 15, 20 years time?
Yeah, I'm ridiculously optimistic. I mean, to the point of certainty, actually. Simon, I think funny looking back, if you go back 30 years and you say what has happened in the last 30 years, and yeah, there's been a massive amount of professionalization and there's been a massive amount of complexity added in, yes, but fundamentally the job of what a lawyer does hasn't changed a lot. What has changed is a huge amount of regulation and blame culture. And particularly, I'm not 100% sure whether this translates 100% into Australasia, but certainly the UK market has Americanized, if you like, in every sense, actually, not just in law firm cultural terms. And there's far more individualism now than there was. But actually, it's more than that, because the actual legal system is sort of Americanized. We've gone from a common sense, common law approach here to it's much more codified. And the consequences of getting things wrong are far worse now than they ever were. So, which has been a charter for lawyers. So we were living within a golden age. And that's only going to continue as well. Regulation never goes backwards, it only gets added to. And yeah, the need for lawyers is growing and growing and growing. So yeah, I would say the idea. I think quality. If you're going to qualify in the next 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years, I think you're going to be in a really good place. I mean, don't get me wrong. There's massive competition, but if you can get your way through, I think that. But by the time AI starts really making an impact, and that might be a lot further away than we think, but by the time it does. I think it'd be a really interesting time to be in the profession. But I think a lot less will change than people think. I don't see the underlying, apart from technology, the underlying fundamentals are rock solid.
Yeah.
Um, and the underlying fundamentals are what makes clients decide and the nature of the relationships, personal trust-based relationships that are completely individual. I mean, the key thing I think is that those very personal trust-based relationships mean that client markets are incredibly fragmented, and that's going to continue.
Yeah.
And that's because of the nature of the relationships, and that very fragmented client market supports a very fragmented supplier market, which is why we don't have a big four of law firms and new law firms spring up and people demerge and seemingly the death of the medium-sized firm is never going to happen. So yeah, I think I'm ridiculously optimistic. However, I would say that the single biggest threat really at the moment and the biggest pressure is it feels like a golden age, but it feels a bit like a gilded cage in the sense that it's getting harder, especially at partner level. I mean, managing partners are under much greater pressure. The job's getting harder, always on 24/7, regulatory pressures. They need to tick boxes for the regulator. In the UK, the regulator here, the SRA, is all over law firms now. The pressure, people pressures, the costs of doing business, attitudes to work, all of these things mean that the underlying profitability is under real pressure, notwithstanding that the top line is continued to move and client and rates have continued to grow, how underlying profitability nearly across the board is going backwards and has been for quite some time, actually. So that's sort of that productivity crisis, if you like. The problem is AI hasn't ridden to the rescue yet. It will. At some point, AI will come to the rescue. But in the meantime, it's a bit like, how can I describe this? It's a bit like, you know, when Henry Ford said, if I'd asked people what they wanted, they'd have said faster horses. But at the moment, all we can do is say, flog the horses faster. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
So I think it's actually a tough time to be in the profession at the moment. And there's a sort of gap period where the markets haven't really sorted themselves out. Demand is high, but supply is sort of, supply is not quite there. And the gap between the two means that actually things are out of balance. And unless and until AI really comes through, I think that's just going to continue.
Another form of balance, which I think that is something that you draw on in your book, is the balance of teamwork, if I can put it that way. And I'm interested in your views about the challenge facing law firm leaders at the moment in terms of maintaining an equilibrium between working from home and working together as a team, as a group of people physically in the same room. What views do you have about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think flexible working, I think, is a human right. So I think, don't get me wrong, I don't think the idea of working from home every now and again and being able to be at home, you know, to take your kids to their sports day, or, you know, they're just human rights, really. However, I do think the idea that partners in particular are working, you know, I mean, I'm in my kitchen. The idea that partners are sat at their kitchen tables on Zoom when their job is either living in the ventricle of the left ventricle of their clients or training their people, I find deeply disturbing, and it's just going to the heart of. It's going to the heart of the partnership model, which is under massive pressure anyway. And yeah, I think a lot of firms are struggling with at the same time as there is this growing sense, particularly in the UK market, this growing sense of individualism. Partners are much more mobile, and at the same time as they're mobile, and there's a slightly febrile atmosphere in the sense of particularly here, because the US firms are coming and offering huge amounts of money to people to move, and they operate a very different model with a very different cost base, and so are more profitable. So yeah, there's a lot of city law firms at the moment where, yeah, the partnership model is under pressure. In fact, the whole business model is under pressure. It's a very, very difficult one to square. But yeah, most managing partners I talk to would say that managing hybrid working is very, very difficult. And that's not about getting people back into the office 5 days a week, because they actually weren't in the office 5 days a week 5 years ago. In fact, I was talking to a managing partner of a Magic Circle firm on Friday, and their attendance at the office stats are exactly the same as they were 5 years ago, pre-COVID. So it's no different, and that's not because and Fridays are deserted. If you go into the city on Friday, it's deserted. Yeah. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday is packed, but people's attendance is not regular. So yeah, it's very, very challenging, and it really gets under the skin of cohesion and teamwork and training people. So yeah, I think it's quite concerning, but I don't think there's an answer to it.
And what's the if there is a positive spin-off with regard to hybrid working, I'm thinking along the lines of mental health and work-life integration, or balance, as some people refer to it. Do you have a view on the mental health state of the profession at the moment?
Yeah, there's always the law has always been a really pressurized, difficult place to be. You have to have really good coping mechanisms. You have to have people around you who are looking out for you. But it's always been difficult, and it was difficult 30, 40 years ago. It is different now, though, because people are under much greater pressure, particularly from technology. I don't think technology really has helped at all. In fact, the sort of always on 24/7 culture of emails and what have you has definitely added pressure. But no, I mean, I think that hybrid working can create as many mental health issues as it solves. I don't think hybrid working or flexible working is necessarily the solution. I think the bigger issue in law firms is individualism, because if you're fundamentally a sole trader, you might be within a large firm, but if you're really a sole trader, then people aren't looking out for you, and you're not looking out for other people. So I've always thought that teamwork has always really been the holy grail of law firms. It's the only real way you can get all those benefits really of being in partnership out, is by generating a really close team working environment. And I have to say, I think there's a lot going on in the UK at the moment with the Mindful Business Charter, and they're doing some great stuff, in particular with city firms. But people are always going to work long hours, and that's not because managing partners are telling them you've got to do X chargeable hours. It's got nothing to do with it. These people are motivated to do the work, and I think it's a common misconception how many control levers firms have over their people, and the answer is not very many. But I think if people are looking after each other in teams, and we used to say when I played rugby, the last thing the captain would say two things as you left the changing rooms. One, enjoy yourself. And the second was look after each other. And if you're going into an environment which can be quite dangerous, you've got to look after each other. And that's really, I think, is the solution in law firms, is people have got to look out for each other and look after each other. Yeah. So yeah, I think teamwork is the holy grail of law firms, but it is is much admired when it happens, but comparatively rarely seen.
One of the tools that you mentioned to help facilitate teamwork in your book, which I found fascinating, was the notion of the psychological contract between the team leader and the rest of the team. Do you want to talk about that just for a couple of minutes and explain what that is and the impact that can have?
Yeah, well, I think I was always told no one will be led where they don't want to go. So the idea that you can be a leader without followers, and the idea that people are going to follow you somewhere blindly, people have to want to go somewhere, and they have to want to go in the way in which you're all going, and therefore the idea. So you have to align. You have to pull people together. They have to be aligned and all pointing in the right direction and want to go in that direction together. They have to have reasonable cohesion between the quality and the qualities of the people, and they have to want things in the same way culturally. If you can align those, if you can have that alignment and cohesion and trust, fundamentally you've got a team, and once you do that, then that psychological contract of I commit, I will behave like this on the basis that you also behave like this. And yeah, at that point you hold people to account, and people hold each other to account.
And when you were at your firm, did you document that, or was it just a sort of handshake thing?
No, we did, and that was a really important part of it. And we wrote it down in a top to bottom career, well, it was called a career framework. So it's a mixture of a competency and career framework. And the excuse was that we needed to show to the most junior people, this is what a career trajectory looks like. So the excuse was to do it for the junior people, but the real reason was to write down for the partners, this is what is expected of you. And this is, so not just in terms of activities, you are going to bill, yeah. You are going to manage, you are going to do these important things, but by the same token, here are the common behaviors that we experience. And I think the best, there was a, I read, there's a famous text, I don't know if you've heard of it, there's a famous text called Perspectives on McKinsey, that was written by one of the founding fathers of McKinsey, a guy called Marvin Bower, something like, it's about 1968, I think, or 1965. And to this day, it is still given, a copy of it is still given to every single new joiner of McKinsey, because it's saying, this is how we do things around here.
Yeah.
That's what's expected. That's really powerful.
Yeah. Lessons for lots of law firms there. In the last 2 minutes here, I'm going to, I hope not unfairly, but as a managing partner, obviously you learned many lessons over the years. Do you have some tips or advice for any managing partners that of firms both large and small that may be struggling with some of the challenges that they're facing today, whether it's from technology or managing people or developing cohesion amongst their teams?
All of these things are eminently soluble. I don't think there's any of these issues are insoluble, provided that you are clear that you have to bring people together. There has to be a reason for the firm to exist. And if there isn't a good reason for the firm to exist, then it won't exist for very much longer. So you have to make sense of the firm for people, and it's not that difficult nowadays. I mean, it's the opportunity is really big. The ability to stand out is really big if you can coalesce high quality people together with a narrative and keep them aligned. It's not actually that difficult, provided that you've got strong leadership. The real difference I see between firms are those which are managed, and a lot of big firms can get away with being managed, and that's fine. A lot of big firms actually, there's no concept of leadership. They don't have to be led. In fact, they resist leadership. It's all about business as usual. Whereas if you've got good, really strong leadership, and that leadership sort of filters down, and you've got leadership at all sorts of different levels, broadly speaking, knock yourself out. The opportunity is massive.
Great advice. Thank you. Hey, listen, if people do want to get hold of your book or find out more about your writings, what's the best website to go to?
Yeah, it's the book is I hate Amazon, so I haven't put it on Amazon. So it's on my website, which is www.helpinglawyersthrive.com.
Excellent. Good stuff, Jonathan. Congratulations on the book. Thank you for joining us on Law Chat today. Lots to think about. And yeah, we'll look forward to catching up with you in person, hopefully one day soon.
Thanks for having me.